about the time that I recognized that the people who were sitting around getting stoned, talking about the movement and the revolution and so on, were actually going nowhere with their lives. They weren't taking good care of their children. They weren't taking good care of themselves. It was almost an overnight kind of impact. I just didn't want it anymore. I just didn't. I saw that there were foibles within the package deal that I had taken on of the counterculture and being a hippie and all that went with it. It was no longer serving to bring me any happiness anymore. It wasn't getting me ahead in life. Not that I was ambitious in the traditional sense of the word, but it wasn't making me get ahead in any sense of the word. I was just spinning my wheels. And I recognized that. And I recognized that I could no longer string together a sentence because I was so saturated with drugs. I recognized that my relationships with men had started off so happily, each one I thought was going to lead me to some kind of cosmic soulmate situation where I was going to be happily living forever, and each one was just almost a worse disaster than the last. And at some point, you get honest with yourself, and you say, this isn't working. Something is really amiss in this situation. And I knew that drugs, as many good experiences as I'd had on them, as much fun as I had had, that I just was not able physiologically to handle them anymore. That it was destroying me. So that was pretty much for me. That really marked the end. I guess the feeling that characterizes that time for me is just more confusion. I had a real loyalty built up to the counterculture. I'd had some wonderful times. I'd experienced parts of myself that I'd never known before. I'd been able to express parts of myself that had never been allowed expression. I'd had some good memories. And yet it wasn't paying off for me. It wasn't going anywhere. And I didn't really have a model to follow anymore. I had a model to follow into the movement because basically everybody was doing it. Everybody was, en masse heading into a countercultural style one way or another. But when I was really done with drugs and when I was really done with that way of thinking, I didn't know what to think anymore. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't know what to espouse. I didn't know what to wear. I was really just kind of lost. And I was also, at that point, getting divorced. And so I did go back and live with my parents for a while. And I did literally tried on some polyester pantsuits, and I kind of tried that out to see, well, do I just kind of go back all the way? Or it really wasn't me anymore. I had just gone too far the other way. I started working. I just started working, and I started working on my education again. And I started just step by step trying to bring some sanity and clarity back into my life. And I started really searching spiritually for an answer. Southern California at that time offered a lot of answers, and I tried, I think, all of them out at one point or another. I was involved in yoga, and I had a guru. I went on a number of yoga retreats, and I did experience a certain peace of mind and a certain calming effect for the emotional chaos that I was coming out of. I tried all kinds of kind of oddball churches, like Church of the Inner Sanctum of the Left Brain of Christ. And only in Southern California can you find such offerings. But and I got a little bit out of each one. I'd try something for a few months and I'd get something out of it, and I'd be real excited about it at first because I thought this was going to really bring me an answer. And then I would see the loopholes. I'd see that the leader was actually sleeping with all the devotees, or that somehow the philosophy just didn't quite make it. It was just a little too off the wall or too weird. There would be something that would disappoint me, and I would go on, and I would go on searching. And during this time, I took something from each philosophy and each idea. Eastern religions were really big at the time, and I embraced at least the Americanized version of Buddhism and Hinduism and some of the Eastern thought. I didn't expect to explore Christianity because I felt I had already done that as a kid, as a Catholic. I thought that I had pretty much tried that and hadn't found what I was looking for. And so it never occurred to me to explore Christianity, but I tried everything else. I studied Judaism, and I really liked that. That was really meat on the bone for me. That was something that was really deep and ancient, and it made a lot of sense. And I was still hungering, though. I was still hungering. Personally, I just need to have an experiential, spiritual experience. I can't just have a religion that may meet other people's needs. I really need to grip into it and grasp onto it, heart and soul. I need to be able to connect on a really deep level with what I believe in. And so I tried one after another religious experience. I was also involved in what now is termed the New Age. I was a psychic. From the time I was 15, I had really extraordinary ability to read people's hands, and I could tell people a lot more than I had read in the little paperback book that I had bought about palmistry. I could tell them a lot more than the book ever gave me knowledge about, and I knew I was tapping into something that was a spiritual realm. And I explored all of the I don't know the word. I explored the availability of astrology, and to the point where I really felt I was almost able to draw up charts myself. And I could, with that same psychic ability, I could read tarot cards, and I became almost, I guess you'd say, dependent upon the I Ching and daily readings, daily spiritual readings to give me guidance and give me a sense of purpose and definition. After years of exploring everything that was available on the spiritual market, I was still hungry. In fact, I was hungrier than I had been before. I knew I hadn't found it for me. I could see that other people were on some kind of a path, and I felt frustrated that my path was so eclectic and so broad. And so I began saying, God, I know you exist, and I know you are real, and since I can't make decisions for myself, I recognized that my decision-making ability was really diminished from having done so many drugs. And so at some point I had decided I'd made a contract with God. You make my decisions for me. Just make it very obvious what I'm supposed to do, and then I'll know I'm okay. And this was kind of God the Father. This was the God that I had somehow believed was there, but I didn't have a name for. And I prayed that he would show me what path I was supposed to be on, what particular way was going to be my way. Because at that point I was doing a little bit of everything. I was on my car dashboard I had pictures of the feet of my guru, and I had feathers from the peyote meeting I had attended and the Indian leader I was following, and just on, rosary beads, and I needed to clean off my dashboard. I needed to have, just one object hanging from my, rearview mirror. I really wanted to have one way. And so I really prayed that God would pick that way out for me, because he knew, where I was at and exactly what my needs were and so on. And I was really expecting somehow an answer to come that would say Zen Buddhism. Because in the background of the counterculture, Zen Buddhism is kind of the top of the heap. It's at the peak of the pyramid. It's the hardest way to go. It's the deepest meditations, etc. And I thought that I was going to be given that answer. And instead I had this tremendous yearning to pray to Jesus. And I was very suspect about that, because having had a background in Catholicism, I really felt I had tried Christianity and that it had failed me miserably. And yet I recognized I'd had so many mystical experiences through drugs and different philosophies by this point that I knew when I was having a mystical experience, I knew I was being drawn to church. And so I figured there must be something that's going to be said that I'll get. These other people won't get, but I'll get it. It'll be some kind of a message between God and me. Christianity, frankly, was not even a consideration for me. I looked down on it as if it were less than the bottom rung on the ladder. And especially born-again Christianity, I felt infinitely superior to the people that I saw on TV who were born-again Christians. I thought that they were really pathetic, and I couldn't relate to them culturally whatsoever. And spiritually, I thought that they were really neophytes. I felt sorry for them. I thought that they were possibly in their first lifetime. And so I continued to have this tremendous magnetic drawing to Jesus. And I knew that I had asked God to show me my way, so I figured, well, it must be along the lines of like Christian Science, or it's not going to be Zen Buddhism because Jesus isn't really in that. So I tried to fit in to my particular viewpoint of spirituality and so on. I tried to figure out how am I going to be a Christian? It's got to be some esoteric brand of Christianity. And to make a long story short, I was sitting under a pinon tree out in the hills in New Mexico here, and I was in tremendous turmoil because I was just not going to become a Christian. That was just not in my order of things. And yet I had this incredible drawing to Jesus, and I couldn't figure out what kind of a church would answer that need. And I felt I felt I was having an experience. I felt I was having a mystical experience. Something was really getting a hold of my attention. And I looked down on the ground. This is a good 10 years after my last drug experience, and I knew I was not hallucinating. I looked on the ground and I saw what I had thought was myself in big chunks, like in big puzzle pieces, just piling up. And I thought, well, if that's who I thought I was, then who's sitting here? And I looked up into the sky, and I saw Jesus. And he came down closer to me, and he showed me that he was one with the Father. He kind of just slowly moved into a position where he was one with God the Father on the throne. And I knew in that moment there was beyond a shadow of a doubt, and the moment before I had absolutely been vehemently opposed to this whole idea that Jesus could be the only way. And now I was seeing him, and I knew who he was, and he was showing me that he was the way, and that I had a choice. I could follow him or not. And he came closer, and he held a Bible in his hand. And I remember thinking at the time, I didn't want to say it out loud, because here I was in the presence of Jesus, but I remembered thinking, the Bible? Not that, anything but that. And he showed me that this was the truth, that I could believe this, that this was not all knowledge, but that this knowledge was true, and that if I knew this, I would know to the right or to the left what was true or not, because I could count on this as being the truth. And I had never been to a church where they did altar calls, and I didn't know about giving your life to Christ or anything like that. And so I knew who he was then, and I was really excited. And the next day I just spontaneously, I know now I was prompted by what we call the Holy Spirit, I spontaneously invited him to come into my life and just to take over, and I was going to follow him. And regardless of the fact that that was going to make me the laughingstock of my crowd, that it was socially the kiss of death, etc., it didn't matter to me. I knew who I had met, and I wanted to follow him. It's a long road. I guess life is for everybody. I've tried to examine what I wanted, what was good, what was valuable from those years. Initially, I think I did throw it out. I walked away from it. And then slowly, some of that has come back, and living in northern New Mexico has been part of, it's just a place where a lot of people are espouse ideas that are really different from the mainstream and so on. And so it's hard for me to answer that question. I have to think about that. Can I think about that a second? Okay. I returned to some of the values I had as a child. I think, strangely enough, being a born-again Christian has given me the freedom to examine a lot of my values. I took on a belief system, but I didn't take on the cultural identity of a born-again Christian. I felt, I guess, grounded enough in myself, identified enough still as, although I'm not a New Ager or a hippie anymore, it certainly is a strong part of my background. I did take a lot with me. There was a lot that was valuable, and I don't really want to throw it away. Everything from the idea of natural foods and enjoying the beauty of the world, enjoying the mysticism of life, the preciousness of life. I guess I can't attribute those strictly to the counterculture, but that's where I learned, that's the period of my life where I really learned to appreciate what was real and what was earthy. And I really did get what I wanted. My dreams did come true. I do have a great husband. I do have beautiful children. I did eventually become a teacher. I'm teaching 6th grade now. I did end up with my early dreams, and I'm still trying to incorporate and sift through and understand what God provides for me and what is just there in the world that isn't really useful to me as a person, isn't really going to help me grow, isn't going to really edify anybody else in my life. It's constantly just a process of sifting and shifting and trying to be facing things honestly and trying to confront issues and trying to be open to what is available that's, I'd say for me it's godly, that what is available that's positive, and I just want to continue to grow as a person. I want to continue to pass on to my children that which is rich and wonderful and good. I think everybody wants to do that.
Could you have lived this life that you now have, and could you experience it now, if it weren't for the 60s? Could that have happened to you without your experiences of the 60s?
It's hard to say what could have happened. I'm not sorry for having gone through a lot of those experiences. I learned a lot. I did learn that there's a lot of different kinds of people, and that people come to truth, come to different realizations, come to different levels of understanding at different times. It is personally a goal for me to not be judgmental about people, about where they're at and what they're into, but to try to be supportive of that in them which is right and good, and to trust that God will do the rest in their life.
Tell me about your husband, about that communion of spirits, if you will. How does one make a marriage work in that circumstance?
Well, I don't have the luxury of being a zealot in my house. I really believe strongly in lifelong marriage. It's a very prominent goal for both my husband and I to be life partners. And so when an issue such as my religious beliefs comes up and threatens to divide, I take it to God in prayer, and I try not to impose what I believe on my husband or anybody else. It's really up to an individual to have their own spiritual decisions and make their own spiritual commitments. I know what I have found, and I'm not broad-minded. I consider myself very narrow-minded at this point. I only believe there is one way. But everybody has to come to that. Everybody has to come to an understanding with God on their own, or it isn't going to be valuable. Nobody could have told me how to believe. I would have thrown that off. I could not have accepted a relationship with God had it been someone else's decision for me, no matter how well-meaning. My husband's Jewish, and I can embrace almost everything about Judaism. There's certain cultural elements of Judaism that I just simply don't understand. Having been brought up in an Irish Catholic military family, I just simply am not familiar with. But biblical Judaism is great. I can, as a born-again Christian, I completely embrace that. I'm something of a Zionist politically, and so I have tried to support him in his Judaism and in his understanding of Judaism.
How about your kids? What do you tell your kids about the 60s, Laurel?
About
Are you
the
honest with them? Do you
60s?
tell them the truth about the 60s, what you did, how you participated? Do you think there's lessons from the 60s that are valuable for them? Are they inquisitive?
My daughter is 10 now, and she saw the slides of our wedding. We had a big hippie wedding with a lot of Sufi dancing, and the champagne was cooling in the river, and it was just a real typical hippie wedding with a teepee in the background and so on. And she was mortified. And she said, "Don't ever show these to my friends, Mom." She does not like that kind of an image. I think that I answer my kids' questions about anything whenever they ask, and to the extent that they ask them. I'm completely open with the kids in my class about my experiences, and we've talked about drugs and the tremendous pull that drugs have, and what it's like to be on drugs, and why you shouldn't do it in spite of the fact that it's so much fun. So I think that the best approach with kids, I remember being a kid wanting to be dealt with honestly and openly, and I think kids can handle honesty and openness. To the extent that they ask, I answer.
But you don't volunteer?
No. We're caught up in Girl Scouts and ski lessons, and their interests are very in the moment. They're not really interested in my past. Maybe when they get older they will be, but they didn't. They've never indicated a tremendous amount of interest in knowing.
How about your own parents?
I remember a guru I had in the early 70s was really into getting everybody to be honest, and he was telling us that the truth would set us free. So I came home from that, visited my parents, and I said, Mom, Dad, from now on I'm just going to tell you the truth. And my mother said, oh, well, that's fine, dear, but just don't tell us everything. And I have been into telling the truth ever since that time. I've been, anybody can ask me anything, and I may not tell them the fullness. It may not be their business, but I'll always tell the truth. And my mother and her friends have gone through so many changes from having kids in our generation. I'm completely open with my mother. We share all our ideas. We're actually real close friends now. I almost have to say that, in retrospect, I think that my parents suffered more. They were agonizing over the decisions that we were making. We were paying the consequences for those actions, but they were too, in a way. We were throwing off everything that they had taught us was right, and that must have been really painful. As a parent now, I really sympathize with kids being rebellious and wanting to do their own thing, especially when they're that thing. As a young girl, here I was hitchhiking, taking off across the country. I mean, my parents were, completely freaked out that I would put myself in what they thought was danger and I thought was just, a cool scene. I cringe to think of what I put my parents through.
How about, just out of curiosity, how about your brother? How did he survive the 60s?
My brother came back from Vietnam a shell of a person, and he was not wounded physically, but he was really damaged emotionally and mentally. He had been a medic with the Green Berets and had seen, I guess, some pretty gory action. And for a couple of years, I remember thinking that he would never be able to do anything other than get the fork to his mouth, that we'd have to take care of him. And it was really, that was one of the saddest things for me during that time, was that my big brother was gone. He was there, but he was gone. Who he was just destroyed. And for years, he just led a life that was the typical vet story, I guess. Just one bad relationship after another. He was strung out on drugs. He couldn't hold together a job. That was really for me, the hardest thing to accept, was this destruction of my brother who had been so neat. And just in the last year or two, he has really pulled it together, and he's really doing great now.
Yeah, the most difficult legacy of all.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any regrets from that period now? Things that you didn't do or did do?
I wish I had stayed in college and gotten it over with. I ended up dropping out of college 4 times. It took me 10 years to get my bachelor's degree. I never set any goals for myself. I never had any personal ambitions. And I wish now that I had thought about some of those women's libers ideas. I wish I had given some thought to having a career earlier in my life. It never occurred to me to think about any other personal goals other than kind of getting through the day, getting through the week. Being in the now was where it was at. And I wish I had given some thought to my future at that point. I wish I had made better decisions regarding relationships, both men and women. I think that I tended to kind of go with the flow, and wherever there was an opportunity to have a good time or just enjoy somebody's company, I ended up thinking somehow that was a situation that was meant to be, and that somehow I ended up with a lot of friends that I now question. I question now my decision-making process at the time, because we didn't always do things that were useful or even interesting. Sometimes we just, took off into the woods and didn't really have a plan of action. I wish I had chosen better, but I wasn't really in a position to be making good decisions.
Do you have any heroes from that time? Any people who as you look back on it, you say, maybe they're gone now, maybe they've been lost in the 60s, through the 60s? It doesn't have to be a famous person.
I guess this is funny, but I really liked Janis Joplin, and I really wish that she had lived. I admired her spunk. I admired a woman who had all that she had, all of her guts and her ability to express herself. And to me, that's one of the big tragedies. She represents a lot to me. She represents a lot of the tragedies, a lot of the lives that kind of went down the drain. And I wish that hadn't happened.
Anything specific that she sang that you connected to?
What was the song that she used to sing about New Orleans? And the Bobby McGee. I don't know, that really grabbed me. There was something really soulful and mournful. It was as if she knew.
That's great.
Okay. What do we have there?
Okay, we're going to have silence meditation.
We're going to get a few seconds of room tone is what he's trying to say. We just sit quietly for about 20 seconds.
I can do that.
Okay, and quiet please.